If you struggle fall fishing, here's a few tips that'll make you a little bit better in the fall. The reason fish schooling in the fall are so hard to catch is because they're eating bait this tiny right here. That's a little bitty spotted bass, but look at this bait right here he spit out when I lifted him in. This is why fall fish are so hard to catch. When they school in the fall, that's barely the size of my thumbnail. So little bitty baits are real effective for fall schooling fish. So in the fall turnover, there's a couple different ways to approach it. I wish I could say there was some scientific approach to the turnover, like the fish do this, but that's the good thing about fishing. That's why I love it, because there's no scientific approach to anything in fishing, hardly. So when it starts turnover in the fall, there's some different things I look for. A lot of times when it turns over, the fish will start schooling really good. It's like right before it happens, maybe a little bit when it does, it kind of pushes a lot of the fish to the top. So you can get back in pockets like this or back in creeks, and the fish will actually, a lot of the bait will be on the top, and the fish will school on it, and you throw small baits to catch them. I like a little fluke stick. This is actually a good way to catch them. It's a little bit smaller than like a fluke style bait, zoom fluke stick to throw at them and kind of just reel it through them schooling. It's a good way to catch them. Or small, I've even caught them on like little bitty spinner type baits, but a lot of times they're eating small bait when it's turning over like that, and that's a good way to kind of start your approach to that fall turnover. I love fishing in the fall, but it can be challenging. A lot of people don't have a lot of experience in the fall because it's hunting season, football season. A lot of people don't get on the water much. But one of the things that makes fall fishing kind of challenging, and something that if you don't know what's going on, it can kind of make it seem weird on the lake, and that's the fall turnover. And we're still pretty hot here in the south, so the turnover started, but it's not in full blast yet, I guess you'd say. And the turnover, when it comes to turnover on the lake, it's not just a set like water temperature or set point that the lake turns over. There's actually a bunch of kind of different turnovers throughout the fall, and different sections of the lake will turn over at different times than other areas like creeks versus the main lake, or the dam versus the upper end of the lake towards the river. So the way you tell the turnovers kind of start and are getting close is you start seeing a bunch of just junk on the graph. And you can see right now on the graph here, we've got on my Lawrence's, there's all kind of these like kind of vertical lines. They're going kind of parallel. They're just reading straight. And what that is, that's actually air bubbles. The air bubbles are coming up from the bottom. The water's trying to turn over. And what that is the water is kind of flipping. That's what it's doing. It's flipping over, and it makes the fishing really, really hard, but it makes reading your graphs almost, it looks like there's fish everywhere, bait, but it's not. You have to decipher what's bait, what's fish, what's the air bubbles coming up if you're trying to fish offshore, or you go fish the bank. But knowing what you're looking at makes a huge difference. When the lake starts turning over also in the fall, a lot of the kind of what I would call offshore fish or deep fish, they get weird. It's hard to catch fish out of brush piles sometimes. It's hard to catch just those fish that are out off the bank because a lot of them suspend, get difficult to catch. You got all the bubbles in the water column, so it's hard to read what you're looking at, but you can run the bank. That's one of my favorite ways. Everybody knows I love a buzzbait. Just a zoom horny toad on my greenfish tackle buzzbait. I love to run the bank. When you're running the bank, it's kind of just typical bank running. I mean, we got some shallow grass here. Love fishing shallow grass. A lot of fish will get on shallow rock during the turnover. So kind of just run down the bank and fish whatever likely targets. It's generally tough fishing in that turnover. You're not gonna go wear them out, but the good thing is in tournament situation that time of year, nobody is. So you're kind of just trying to catch one fish at a time, burn down the bank and stay in likely looking areas. Maybe catch some out of rock, some off of grass, maybe one off wood. There's a lot of different ways to approach it, but just stay fishing likely targets with something you can cover a lot of water with, like a buzzbait. Can't go wrong with a buzzbait in the fall. Black horny toad, nice largemouth. So when you're out deep graphing in the fall or in a turnover and there's a lot of bubbles, you can see all these, this is a pretty good example, all these vertical lines, when they're constantly rising like that, that's always gonna be air bubbles. If you ever see what looks like this and all of a sudden it arcs and goes back down, that's a good sign that that's bass. But when they're constant, just going one way, like all these, that's just an air bubble rising that's staying in the cone. That is a big ball of bait. You can see that. Oh, here's a good example. See this one line? We weren't straight over it, but it went back down. That right there was a fish of some type. You got your air bubbles going, but this one's going the wrong way. So you know that is not an air bubble. But that fish wasn't straight under the transducer. It didn't read that well, but that was definitely some type of fish. So when they're constantly going up, you're talking air bubbles. And then when obviously a big cloud like that, you're talking bait fish. But when you get a line that's not going uniform like all these rest are, that right there was probably a fish of some type, just not straight under the boat. So he didn't read that well. And that was probably another fish that was near the cone. We just didn't go straight over him again. I'm getting some thick air bubbles now. You can see it's all just constant rising. And that's a good indication the water's starting to turn over. And don't get this confused. When you're idling, won't look, we're floating still now, so the air bubbles are staying under the boat. When you're idling, it's gonna look a little more like fish, but you're still not gonna have that arc like a fish on the 2D. And down scan, you can see it on down scan. If I switch to the down scan, you can see the air bubbles there, and that's when I mentioned some fish went by. You can tell that's some fish on the bottom right there. And see if we can go back and find that ball bait. And there's that ball bait. We're about to lose it on the screen here, but there's that ball bait we had earlier. So down scan in 2D, you can really see that turnover happening and need to know what you're looking at to decipher if it's fish or if it's bubbles. Quite often in the fall turnover, one section of the lake's just bad. There's no other way around it. It's sometimes it might be the river, sometimes it might be the lower end, but the other option you have, if you can't catch fish running down the bank, not finding many schooling, just can't find any good bite, is go try to find a part of the lake that's already turned over or hasn't turned over yet. And so I use my map, look at the river, be like, oh, well, this river section might be different, or go to the lower end of the lake. There's almost always a section of lake that the fish are biting better in the fall. That's the one thing in the fall that's kind of tricky. I say most times a year you can win in any section of the lake if you figure it out. But in the fall, a lot of times there's just big sections that fish just aren't biting that well because of the turnover and the change in water temps and all that. So if it's not going well, don't burn all your gas out, but get around the lake and look for an area where the fish are biting a little bit better.